Hi, and welcome to the World Networking Podcast, Philosophical Detours. We're back from a little bit of a hiatus and hoping to get back into the flow of bringing people in and having philosophical talks. Today we have Ivan joining the show, and I'm excited to have him here. Ivan, what's something you consider a core philosophy for yourself?
Something I've kind of learned in life is just realizing things aren't really black and white, and pretty much everything's a shade of gray. So a lot of history that we see, we think of one side or the other as evil or good, and typically that's not the case. It really depends on the viewpoint that you have with it and what side you're looking from.
That's a good way to put your perspective. I think there's a lot that can be identified if you open your eyes up to different options and different possibilities. Because if you don't even consider things being part of reality, then it's hard to facilitate a proper balance.
Yeah, definitely agreed. Unfortunately, we live in a reality where people typically judge within the first 3 seconds and don't care about any evidence or facts that comes upon after.
Yeah, there's a lot of short attention spans when it comes to this kind of stuff. There's a lack of interest for some, just because it's hard to tolerate the intensity of the speech or the depth of the conversation as a whole. It can be complicated if you overcomplicate the message.
Yeah, I'm actually reading a book about Cleopatra right now, but it's more like trying to find out the truth of who she was, because all of her history is essentially told by the Romans originally, and then the rest is kind of written by people like 100 years later and beyond past that.
Yeah, her history is really spotty.
Yeah, it's interesting, and just trying to figure out the truth of what might have actually occurred, because, you know, all their books and history kind of got burned and erased.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there was definitely a big change of events throughout that period of time for Egypt. I think, for me, one of the core things is just having something that adapts with the times, because that shows it makes sense to kind of pick a rhythm within reality, like something that correlates with the structure of how things work, rather than fighting against the flow. Almost a bit of a Taoist perspective in that sense with the metaphor, but you know, it's kind of like there's not just one thing. I think you can adhere to bits of all and find your way, as we all have different lives and different lifestyles. Like, I don't think we were always meant to be the same, you know? That's not the ideal form of humanity.
Yeah. I mean, we see that all the time in America. Is you have a lot of the elders who will say are stuck in their ways in a sense and don't want things to change and don't like where our society's going, which there could be positives and negatives to that, but we are advancing, especially with technology, so you got to kind of adapt and overcome with that. It's kind of what the Army teaches you. Regardless of your situation, things are going to change, and most of the time they're not going to go as you planned, so you got to figure out how to be successful.
Yeah, being able to coordinate yourself to find success. It's very, very important. And definitely something I believe would be considerable as a skill. There's always different environments where applying yourself isn't always easy. You know, you walk into a room as an apprentice, like I am, in the trade world. That's not always easy for some people. It's a daunting task to learn something from the ground up that you're uncomfortable with. But the rewards from building from the ground up in a proper manner, in a balanced manner, can really help boost your motivation, boost your willingness to live.
Yeah, I get that. I actually went to trade school to become an electrician probably about a year ago, and that's after dealing with the medical world and being a nurse for a decade. So just that alone was a huge change.
Wow.
But
Yeah, that's heavy.
Yeah, but I wanted to learn something new, so that's kind of why I went. But I could tell like it wasn't really my thing or my atmosphere that I wanted to stay in long term. So I pretty much just took the knowledge and decided to go in a different direction.
What for you was the distinct moment that you really realized in your life that it wasn't working for your lifestyle? It was something you wanted to change.
As far as like switching to electrician or?
Yeah, switching career paths, because medical is something that takes a lot of devotion and time to situate. So there must have been some reason you were motivated to take that leap.
Yeah, I mean the biggest thing is I was a medic in the Army for 8 years, and so once I got out, I didn't really do anything medical for like 2 years, and then I started back working as a nurse again. Man, it just wears you down, and a lot of things have changed, especially just in the past 4 years, as far as the medical environment goes. And it's just, you see nurses like getting put in prison and stuff, and it's just, it was probably more fear than anything. You know, like I work in long-term care with the elderly a lot. And so sometimes you'll have like 30 patients, maybe even more just to you. And that's far too many, I'll say, to do things correctly and by the book. And, you know, if you make one mistake, it could cost you your career in the past. And now potentially you can even go to prison for it. And just seeing all those articles on the news, it really messes with your mind and puts you in kind of like a fear factor kind of sense. And want to go for something different, do something with my hands, and that's why I tried to switch to electrician, but that wasn't where I wanted to go either. So now I just decided to go back to college and going for cybersecurity now.
Yeah, that's a lot of choices there, and
yeah,
it's all very intricate career paths. I think it's great that you gave the electrician path a try. I think the trades are a good option to, at least at the very minimum, gain some experience with people and connections. I know I've networked with quite a few great individuals through experiencing the various job sites and the various environments that we encounter. I love that kind of situation where you're able to puzzle things together. That's why before I almost went into the medical field myself, but I ended up being pulled a different direction at that time, and it was always something I found interest in studying about, though, in my free time. So the different technologies coming out, and I still do try to keep up, but the medical field, as you've said, has changed so dynamically, and censorship as a whole, along with the education systems, like format for teaching staff, it's all become roadblocked by these various social aspects that people don't necessarily mean to cause fault with, but end up accidentally offending. And accidental offensive maneuvers shouldn't be something that costs your career, you know? And it's at the very least, I think, something that needs to really be addressed when it comes to the freedom of speech in America, at least.
Yeah, I mean, just being in the medical world, especially when COVID happened, man, there was just so many dynamically different informational pieces coming out from medical people that were like essentially saying the opposite of each other. And it's just, being a medical person, you know how to like actually do your own research, make sure it's peer reviewed, and know what's true or not, or maybe there is no correct answer yet. But it's like just being the average person, you're probably going to believe what you hear, especially if it's coming from a doctor. And so it's just seeing that and how so many people got divided. It kind of was a sad sight to see.
Yeah, culturally speaking, that was a very big blow to the medical space. And a lot of people walked out of their jobs. I definitely remember that.
Yeah, it was huge. It was just unfortunate, and especially like that first 6 months that it hit, like there was so much different types of information coming out. Is it serious? Is it not serious? What should you do?
Yeah, and that affects your core philosophy. I mean, that affects how you operate day to day. That's a life shift.
Yeah, it definitely is. And even now, I mean, it's 4 years later, we're still learning more stuff about it. And it's just like, that's kind of the learning process with medical field is everything keeps changing based on what we learn. I mean, that's true with that and what we know about outer space and everything.
Yes, which is not enough.
Yeah.
Man, there's so much to be explored. It's really exciting. I like to think.
As far as astrophysics go and everything, there's just so much out there. And we have thousands of pieces of information we still know. Like, I mean, we don't even know what we don't know. That's the worst part.
Yes.
But we realize from what we can at least see, like, we know like 1% of it all.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's all built upon theories, which are still being challenged in current times. Like there's a lot of physics theories that are having to be redrafted due to the conflicts with gravity and that whole theory of gravity. So
Yeah.
I definitely tend to believe what they're saying, what they're pointing out. Gravity's a strange concept. To think everything would just gravitate towards this one thing because of its mass, but we have balloons that float off. Like, yeah, it's hard to believe. There isn't some dynamic shift that's not just up and down.
Yeah, I mean, the way the universe works certainly is complicated. And then you have things like wormholes and whatnot, and the theory of something like traveling at the speed of light by essentially, putting yourself in a bubble, and it's that way nothing else affects you. It's all seems like just makeshift and make believe, but some of it might be true maybe 1,000 years from now.
Yep, there's some founded evidence, or at least concepts that tend to really build these ideas. I enjoy reading about that kind of stuff. It's interesting to see what society concocts.
Yeah, we'll see if Elon Musk can take us to Mars.
I know that one's going to be an interesting one. I also agree.
Yeah, that's the first step, but so far they've made pretty big improvements with just their rockets and shuttles.
Oh yeah,
That's exciting.
yeah, their engines are great. They're condensing them a lot, and it's an exciting rate of change when it comes to the explorative venues. Even with submarines and drones, there's a lot of ability, a lot of mobility. Now, with that being said, the second part of our conversation, I wanted to turn to a more worldwide perspective. Where would you like to explore more within worldwide philosophies?
So I guess as far as like thinking and how we perceive where we came from and everything, that's something that's always kind of bothered the back of my head is, where did we actually originate from? And there's so many theories, especially just with ancient history, like, the idea that maybe we're created essentially from an alien civilization that came here, however long ago, with our DNA being so similar to certain other animals here on Earth. It's certainly thought-provoking. So for me, it's kind of like, I would love to know our true beginning and where we came from, how we developed, what is the truth. And I think, and crazy enough, I think religion, in a sense, it all essentially points to a similar story, even though they're different. But whether that story is God or whether it's another super advanced being that brought us here is something that I constantly think about every day, pretty much.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. There's a dynamic of universal theories. I mean, it's like the flood. The flood's a pretty universal dynamic between religions that stands out because our world has very clear evidence of flood events. So it's hard to deny such stern proof of vast changes on these historical scopes. And that all plays into what builds these religious backgrounds, these religious stories. Because at the end of the day, it's a form of history, if not anything else.
Yeah, definitely agree. There's a lot of pretty sacred ancient texts that all kind of talk about a similar story. Everything that's happened in the past, and maybe we've had multiple apocalypses like the flood or, giant flames erupting over the earth and whatnot.
Yeah, I believe there's a period of time, 516 AD, where there was like volcanic action that had a year of just black darkness due to the ash being produced, smoking out the whole world, or at least a major part of it. And crops failed, and people like froze in certain regions due to the lack of sun.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking about all the history, it's unfortunate how much of it we don't know. All that we know is what was actually written down and recorded, and you think of the Library of Alexander, it was all burned down, and so it's like, man, I just wish courses in history didn't happen the way that they did.
Yeah, it's tragic that knowledge is lost in such trivial means when it comes to like wars in ancient history. The violence that was just caused by political schemes and turmoil, because that would happen all the time, especially between generals.
Yeah, Roman history has enough of that for us to hopefully learn from their actions, but it doesn't seem like that nowadays.
Yeah, Rome's definitely packed full of some crazy military exploits, especially when it came to their civil wars, though. Yeah. They were quick to find solutions in their own ways.
That is for sure.
is there a certain culture you find a major fascination with outside of Rome? Because I know, as it sounds, you have some history with studying the Roman culture.
Yeah, I mean, so I've read some books and just about like all the ancient temples and whatnot, kind of like the pyramids. We always think of the pyramids in Egypt, which I love learning about ancient Egyptian history. But there's like pyramids all over the world, which is a crazy phenomenon. There's pyramids in Russia, there's pyramids all over in South America, and a lot of them have like similar statues and whatnot representing whatever these individuals are. And it's fascinating to see all over the world in parts where they shouldn't have known about each other. They all have a similar aspect of what they created.
Yeah, and the correlations that can be made are interesting, to say the least. Like, I know one between like Greece and ancient Christian philosophy was the god Apollo was inspiration for some of the early Christian artworks due to him being a figurative god of light, and the light of God and the Holy Spirit, it all correlated in this dynamic of visual artwork. So whether or not that was the true original inspiration, we'll never fully know. It's hard to know a testimony that old, but it's something that's theorized, as there's a lot of close resemblance between the cultures. And we do know that Christianity had a lot of origins within the Greek language and the Greek culture. Or growth, I should say, not origins.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly fascinating just to see how advanced they were in the past ages, and how there's kind of like a point in ancient history where there was just a massive influx in intelligence that was gained. They started building these giant temples like the pyramids and whatnot, and it just kind of came out of nowhere. And literature came around, and people started note-taking and whatnot, and actually recording history, and it's just interesting. Maybe there was an apocalypse that happened like roughly 12,000 years ago, and there's potential that maybe there was people even before that came about after the apocalypse and spread that information. That's kind of what jump kicked it.
Yeah, and that could absolutely be the truth in that situation. There's definitely a big expanse of proven technologies, that these people developed in all sorts of sides of the world. I know I was reading about something with the Grand Canyon, and there being a potential Egyptian or hieroglyphic-based colony that was established, and that had always blew my mind, that you'd have such influences in an area that I strictly never heard any such events, and to discover this kind of stuff, to be a part of that living history that we're in, where things are shifting so radically in the archaeological field. It's amazing to follow along, and it's exciting stuff. I can't wait to see what they do with China and the temple, where they've had that sealed off with Mercury River inside. I forget the leader's name off the top of my head, but that temple is one of the ancient wonders, or considered ancient wonder, with the scale of loot, so to speak. There's a lot of stuff inside.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think, in all these ancient temples, there's a lot of probably knowledge that's hidden in there and safekept, and maybe it's for a reason. But I remember an old ancient story that I was just reading through. How true it is, I can't give you that, but it was about this. Basically, they worshipped him, and he was this big white guy with a giant beard and everything, and he would go around to different parts in the world, and he's the one who kind of taught them, we'll call them moral values, essentially. And apparently he had special powers, whatever those were, and he brought a lot of people out of, cannibalism and whatnot. And he had a couple disciples with him, but eventually I think, we'll call it, the darkness rose about and kind of fought him back and led the world into turmoil again. That knowledge was lost. But when the conquistadors came over to South America, essentially they welcomed them because their head guy looked just like this being that they were taught for generations. So they thought he was their savior in a sense, and of course it didn't turn out that way.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that. I haven't heard that before. That's a an interesting dynamic to the expansionism stories, as those are dynamics that no one can undo, that's for sure. But we can learn from them and adapt and overcome as people of this world.
Yeah, that's what we should try to do. I mean, thankfully, I think we're heading mostly in the right direction by just, having some sense of what's right and wrong in certain situations and establishing laws that keep most people from steering too far in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You have to have some boundaries within yourself and within your country to, again, find that balance. I mean, work has to be done, and one way or the other. In a lot of regions, it's environmental work. So it really matters what our social structures look like and how our social dynamics operate.
Yeah, there is a scientific belief, but it's kind of like what level of society we are. They say we're a type 0, meaning we're not a global organization, essentially. So essentially, if all of us on Earth were united as one, we would be a type 1 civilization and able to harness the power of the planet. And then type 2, I believe, is able to harness the power of the solar system and, essentially using the sun's energy as our own, which in a sense we kind of do, but it's a little more advanced in that theory. And I think type 3s where we're essentially amongst the whole galaxy and using all the energy there. But it's essentially kind of like a hope, maybe if we keep advancing, we can achieve these theories.
Yeah, and we can hit this threshold of advancement.
Yeah.
Come to a new age. Yeah, I do remember hearing about the type 1, type 2 civilizations. It's very interesting, that whole discussion.
So I remember some of the names of the old man with the beard that I was talking about. Like some societies called him the Viracocha. Some societies call him the Quetzalcoatl. I had to look up that name just now, but
yeah, if you have any articles on this too, by all means, we can link this and put this under the episode discussion, and people can look at these articles and look into this further if they'd like.
Yeah. I read some of the books by Graham Hancock, and some people see him maybe as an extremist outlier, just because he's trying to figure out some of these ancient history stories that we truly don't know about.
Yeah.
But I enjoy the research because he's spent his whole life traveling all around the world and actually inspecting all these ancient ruins.
Well, I think that's honestly a great place for us to close off this discussion, and we've covered a decent amount around some core aspects to what you've found interests you, and I appreciate you sharing these aspects, Ivan, and coming to the show today.
Absolutely, it was an honor.
I hope we can continue to have some discussions in the future and maybe get some other people in here for other dynamics and explore upon some values in the human relations world.
The future beholds of us.
I agree. Well, Ivan, I hope you have a good rest of your evening. Thank you, everyone, in coming to this episode and joining us for this discussion on the World Networking Podcast. We look forward to the future, and we will see you next week.